Stories of an Aircraft Builder. How I Met the Ape. I've been thinking back and forth for a while about whether I should include this story, and I think it will make some of you smile. So I'll add it now as episode 27-1. Episode 27 was about the projects from 2005 and 2006. I reported on how Peter Jackson called me and asked if I wanted to build planes for him, and that he invited me to New Zealand to meet him. That was a great thing. The flight with the whole family took 24 hours, so not only was it half a trip around the world, but also the length of a full rotation of the Earth just to get there. Thank the gods that airplanes were invented at some point, otherwise it would have never been possible so quickly, and I might still be on the road today. When we arrived and landed in Wellington, Matthew Trevitsky, Peter Jackson's right-hand man, was there to pick me up at the hotel. It started well. I was standing there with Alexandra and our little Yannick, and he drove up in a flashy two-seater sports car. It quickly became clear that it wasn't going to work. Apparently he had completely lost sight of that. He then organized a rental car, which I also drove on the first day. However, the steering wheel was on the wrong side, and everyone else was also driving on the wrong side of the road, so the traffic in Wellington was pretty annoying. We agreed to rent push bikes for the rest of the weeks there. We were accommodated in what was then the Hotel Duxton, right in the city centre. Today the complex is called the Amora Hotel Wellington and is within sight of the Te Papa Museum. The Te Papa is highly recommended for anyone who comes to Wellington. Alexandra spent lots of time there with our little one, and they saw a lot. His workshops, Wawarapa Aviation Limited, were located on Camp Street, right across town. Peter Jackson actually wanted to show us his beautiful New Zealand and had all sorts of things planned. I wasn't particularly interested. I told him that I had already seen it in a German television series called Country People Adventures, and that the grass here was just as green as it was over there. I don't know if he found that funny or not. I wanted to help him build airplanes in his workshop. At the time the SE-5As was being built there. That interested me more. In any case, I don't think New Zealanders are very good with truth. For example, they seem to have invented their national bird, the kiwi. We saw a small figurine of one in almost every garden. Sometimes they were even the size of an ostrich, so not unlike our garden gnomes. But I never saw a real kiwi during my time there. At least I can't confirm that they really exist. He then assigned a young girl, her name was Brenda as far as I remember, who looked after Yannick and Alexandra every day while I stayed there and worked in the workshop. The days began with breakfast at the hotel. Yannick was a real wild child back then, and he was always running across the dining room. Some of the guests probably felt annoyed by this, but nobody said nothing. On the very first day he hung himself on one of the large curtains and ripped it right down. I had to put my foot down. But in my memory there was never been a friendlier behavior towards children than I experienced down there in New Zealand. It was no problem at all, and even Yannick was given an ice cream to his table afterwards as consolation for his annoyance. To get from the hotel to the workshop, we cycled every morning along the Great Harbour Way and the Evans Bay Parade halfway around Evans Bay. On the opposite side of the bay was anchored the Venture, the ship that the film crew used to cross to the island in the film King Kong. I went to work, and Alexandra and Yannick were taken over by Brenda. That wasn't the case in the first 2 days, of course. So we first looked at the Venture and the things that were laying around in Camp Street. There were still film props from The Lord of the Rings. Among them were the huge battering rams that the orcs used to storm the gates of Minas Tirith, all made of paper mache, of course. We were amused by how light everything was, yet looked really totally convincing and incredibly heavy. Yannick liked to do gymnastics on these battering rams and swing back and forth on them. On shelves up under the roof there were also 2 models of Minas Tirith itself in different sizes, as well as many other film props of the movie. At the time, there was a traveling trophy going around at the workshop. They called it the Wally of the Week. Some former employee by the name of Wally must have tried to cut an aluminum sheet on a circular saw, which went terribly wrong, of course. The sheet and saw blade were mounted on a wooden board, and each week they gave it to the person who did the stupidest thing. I won the prize twice. It was considered extremely stupid to go to work on vacation. The film studios were not far away, almost around the corner, and at the time we were there, the final scenes of King Kong were being shot. Not everyone was allowed in during filming, but we were invited ones. It was the day when the scene was filmed in which Jack Driscoll climbed up a slope. At the top, the ape was sleeping under a tree with a girl in his arms. "Shh, shh, I want to save you," or something like that. Maybe you remember the scene from the movie. The girl then crept out of the monkey's arm and over to Driscoll. There was a break in filming and I was even able to talk to Naomi Watts. And that's how it went. I was standing off to the side and talking to Peter Jackson about the planes when Naomi Watts came over with the script in her hand and wearing her delicate dress and urgently wanted to discuss something with Peter Jackson. So she squeezed herself between me and him and looked at me and said, "Hi." And I answered, "Hi." That was it. She was pretty. She disappeared again and I continued talking to Peter Jackson. But at least I talked to her. The tree under which everything was filmed is now important, because when I was looking at the film set in peace and quiet, I took the opportunity and tore off a branch. It was all plastic. Alexandra just shook her head, and I pocketed the few leaves. Today they are hanging in my exhibition, and anyone who wants can touch them and say the next time when he sees the scene in the movie that they have already touched this tree. The branch hangs directly above a roll of film from Peter Jackson's composition. He filmed everything privately too, and there were a few minutes of film in this there. I don't know if the scene was finished before or after I broke off the branch, but if it was after that, then I can safely say that I helped design the set of that scene. Anyway, the film was being shot during those days, and before we left the country, there was a big closing party on a film set to mark the end of filming. We were invited to that too. The festivities were totally crazy and took place in the backdrop of the buildings in New York City. I have never seen anything like it. The set was a full scale of an entire street, completely built, with shops and shop windows, with everything on display authentically, from toothpaste to writing utensils, from umbrellas and hats to entire clothing stores full of mannequins and ladies in the chicest dresses of the era. There was a water hydrant by the side of the road. I just wanted to lean on it and it fell over. Just a dummy. The streets were full of period cars. Totally crazy. All lies. And the best grilled lamb I've ever eaten. Everyone who had anything to do with the film was jumping around. From the cleaning lady to the main actors. I've rarely seen so many people in one place. Photography was strictly forbidden, and there were strict controls to ensure that no one smuggles a camera in so that no view of the set reaches the public before the film was actually shown in the theaters. When we said goodbye as we took off, Peter Jackson told me that he thought it was a shame that he hadn't seen us there. I told him that we had seen him and that we found it absolutely funny how dozens of people were trotting behind him like a duck march. You could literally see that their importance decreased the further away they were from him. He asked me why I hadn't come to talk to him. I just replied that I didn't have to annoy him with my presence. We said goodbye and then flew away. Looking back now, I'm not really sure how he saw me. For me, he was a remarkable man with an incredible drive in his field. I'm not a big film buff. There's nothing true about that. And so I wasn't crazy about being part of all that. I didn't throw myself at him, I mean. There were others who did that, and I think it was enough punishment for him, never knowing whether someone was being honest or not. I liked him. We were certainly similar in many ways in terms of drive and creativity. He was at the top end of the pay scale and I was at the bottom, but that doesn't matter. Entertainment has always brought in more money than manual work. I don't know if he looked the same way at me and perhaps would have liked to get in touch with me more, on a human level, without all the professionalism around it. We didn't have time to find out. He was, of course, always busy. As I understand it, he wanted to bring people from the aviation scene together, also to find out whether they could get along with each other or not, apparently with a view to a later film project on the topic, but those were just rumors. One evening there was a dinner at the old St. Mary's Convent, which was only attended by guests who had something to do with aviation, many historians, other aircraft builders, artists, etc. Incidentally, that evening was also the evening when the experience with James Dietz that I told in episode 13 took place. There were all kinds of people there, and we had the opportunity to sit at a table with Peter and talk. I remember how the food was brought out, and he was asked if he wanted fish. No, I'm not a fish person, he said, and quite unashamedly reached for a fork and then scratched his back with relish, as if nothing had happened. That was a topic of conversation in our house for a long time. What little things can keep you occupied? So he was very informal, friendly and nice. Despite a certain distance between us, I've never thought that he would drop me and kick me in the back like he eventually did, but more on that later. We flew home, and at home everything went on as usual, and I continued to build airplanes. I was happy. Then one day a small envelope arrived with tickets for the European premiere of the film on December 7th, 2005 in Berlin. The whole gang of ours was invited. I also took my father and his Waltraud with me. We were put up in Hotel Adlon, and Alexandra actually bought me a suit especially for the occasion, which is still hanging in my closet today. I don't think I've ever worn it again. That was funny. On the evening of the premiere we didn't want to be late and we thought we left early. The square in front of the cinema was full of onlookers and reporters. Since we had no idea what the costumes were, we marched straight through the crowd to the rolled-out red carpet and towards the entrance. The result was a flurry of camera flashes, like in the movies. Nobody knew who these characters were who were walking along the red carpet. We could have been important. At the door, we waved our tickets, but were rudely directed to a side entrance. Well, how would you know something like that? A completely foreign world of false glamour. So we marched back along the red carpet because everything else was cordoned off and made our way to the side entrance. There are probably important photos of all of us in some archive now, and some people may have wondered who these folks were. The premiere itself was no less interesting. All the celebrities were there. Everyone who thought they were important did the honors. And we were right in the middle of it all. I can't even name them all. Silvio Berlusconi, former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, Frank Zander. Not that they were important to me in any way, but it was fun to have sat in a cinema with them. Afterwards, there was a reception that I found extremely embarrassing. My father said he was doing me a favor by telling every reporter that I was the one who built airplanes for Peter Jackson. I was important and that they should ask me questions and take photos of me. Heaven! The camera clicked a few times. He also intercepted Frank Zander and wanted to force a conversation on him, but he wasn't interested at all and left my father standing there looking stupid. So it was an experience that you won't get back anytime soon. Thanks to Peter for all that. I was still happy when I was back home and was only allowed to build airplanes. And now you know how I met the biggest ape in film history.